Zane Carter's boots hit the floor with a soft thud as he stepped onto the cold, sterile ground of the simulation chamber. His chest was tight with anticipation, a mix of nerves and excitement swirling inside him. The other cadets, a mix of species from across the galaxy, glanced at him with varying degrees of curiosity. They weren't used to seeing a human in their midst, let alone one daring enough to join their most brutal training exercise. "Let's see how long this one lasts," muttered one of the alien cadets in an unfamiliar tongue, her eyes narrowed with skepticism. Zane didn't react to the comment. He'd heard worse in his time. He was used to the looks, curiosity, disbelief, and occasionally, outright disdain. The reputation of humanity was still in its infancy in the Galactic Federation, and for many, humans were little more than fragile, soft creatures from a backwater planet. He would prove them wrong, though. As he always did. "Cadet Carter," Lieutenant Carr's voice boomed across the chamber, drawing Zane's attention. "You are about to face the test of endurance. It will push you to your physical and mental limits. The simulation will create an environment designed to break you. You will fail, but that is what this test is about. No one has survived it yet." Zane straightened his back, feeling the weight of the Zorvian's words, but he didn't let them affect him. Carr's species was known for their brutal physical prowess, and Zane had already seen how Carr looked down on humanity. But Zane wasn't here to impress the lieutenant, he was here to prove that humans could survive anything. Without another word, Carr gestured to the simulation control panel, and the lights in the chamber flickered. A low hum filled the air, followed by the hiss of the door sealing shut behind him. Zane's heart rate picked up as the chamber's temperature began to drop rapidly. A sudden blast of wind whipped through the room, and the sky overhead flickered with clouds. The simulation had begun. A violent storm roared to life around him. Zane's eyes adjusted quickly, his military training kicking in as he assessed his surroundings. Rain poured down in sheets, the temperature plummeting below freezing. "This is nothing," he muttered under his breath, adjusting his gear. He'd faced worse back home. Out of the storm, figures began to emerge from the fog, a pack of alien beasts, large, armored creatures that were a fusion of predator and prey. Their massive eyes gleamed with hunger, their claws clicking against the slick ground. The cadets who had watched him enter the simulation were now whispering, eyes wide. It was their first true test. For Zane, it was just another challenge. The first beast lunged toward him, its enormous jaws snapping shut with a sound that could break bone. Zane ducked, twisting to the side as the creature's teeth missed him by inches. With a quick swipe of his combat knife, he struck at the beast's side, drawing a line of blood. It howled in pain, but it didn't retreat. "Not bad for a human," Carr's voice came through the comms, dripping with condescension. Zane gritted his teeth, sidestepping another lunge and slashing again, his instincts guiding him. The beast staggered back, but its wounds healed faster than Zane anticipated. The creature's alien physiology was adapted to endure. But so was Zane. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to stop, to give up, but Zane refused to let it win. He was only just warming up. The next beast came at him, faster, angrier. He barely had time to react as its claws raked across his chest, the force sending him tumbling to the wet ground. The sharp pain hit him like a jolt of electricity, but Zane's focus didn't waver. He rolled with the blow, using the momentum to launch himself back onto his feet. His hand was already on his side, but there was no time to check for damage. The Zorvian cadets watched in silence now, their eyes fixed on Zane. Some looked at him with disdain, while others, like the tall Ascarian cadet, seemed to watch with something else, curiosity, or perhaps a flicker of respect. Zane didn't look back. The creatures were relentless, but his training had prepared him for this. He'd been in worse storms. His body was aching, bruised, but his mind was sharp, his will ironclad. As one more beast charged toward him, Zane twisted around, delivering a powerful strike with the blunt side of his knife to its head. The beast collapsed, stunned. "Impressive," Carr's voice came again. But this time, there was something colder in his tone. "But not enough." Zane didn't have time to dwell on the comment. The storm intensified, a cacophony of noise and violent winds. The next wave of enemies emerged, larger, more dangerous. His body screamed in protest as he stumbled backward, but his mind remained clear. He had to keep moving. As one of the creatures lunged for his throat, Zane instinctively reached up to block the attack, grabbing its arm and twisting. He felt the bone snap under his grip, the creature screeching as it fell back. He didn't stop to admire the victory. The next monster was already charging. He could feel his strength waning, the world beginning to spin. The injuries were stacking up, scrapes, bruises, and a deep gash in his side from one of the earlier attacks. His vision blurred as blood seeped through his suit. But Zane didn't stop. Not for a moment. "Get up," he muttered to himself, staggering as the next wave of enemies closed in. The cadets were silent, except for one whisper, a soft murmur of disbelief from the Iscarian. How is he still going? Zane ignored them. The creatures were relentless, but so was he. When one of the larger beasts swung its claws toward him, Zane dove under it, rolling to the side and bringing his knife up in a swift arc. The beast howled in pain, staggering back. But Zane was already on his feet, blood dripping from his wounds. The storm didn't let up, and neither did the creatures. But neither would he. It was then that he felt the searing pain in his side, an injury so severe, it should have left him immobilized. He gasped for breath, but instead of falling, he rose. "Just a scratch," he whispered, shaking his head as the world tilted. The simulation room flickered around him. He staggered forward, his legs shaking, but his will was unbroken. "Just a scratch," he repeated, not to the cadets watching, not to Carr, but to himself. Because he wasn't done yet. Zane's body felt like it was falling apart. His pulse hammered in his ears as the medics pried open his combat suit, revealing the extent of the damage. His breath was shallow, his vision blurred from the pain, but he couldn't bring himself to show weakness, not yet. Cadet Carter, one of the medics, a tall, slender being with translucent skin and sharp, insect-like features, hovered over him, her voice clipped with urgency. "Your injuries are severe. We need to treat these now." Zane gritted his teeth and pushed himself upright. "I'm fine," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "It's just a scratch." The medic raised an eyebrow. "A scratch? You've lost nearly a quart of blood, and you have multiple fractures. You're lucky your internal organs are still intact." Zane ignored her. "I'm not dead yet, am I?" The medic hesitated, her gaze flickering between him and the data on her handheld scanner. "No, but you should be." "Then I'll take that as a win," Zane replied with a grin, though it hurt like hell to move his lips. The medic sighed and stepped back, clearly used to dealing with stubborn humans, but unable to hide her concern. Zane wasn't surprised. Most species in the Federation were unfamiliar with the human ability to endure injuries that would cripple others. To the Zorvian cadets watching through the observation window, he must have looked like a broken toy. But he wasn't done yet. After a few moments, the medic began to treat his wounds, her hands working efficiently, though with a tinge of disbelief. She inserted a small device into his side, a nanomachine injector, and within seconds, his flesh began to knit itself together. But even as the blood flow slowed, the pain didn't subside. It felt like his body was on fire. "How did you survive out there?" the medic asked, glancing back at him as she worked. "No one's made it this far before. Not even the Varnak or the Zelther." Zane winced but didn't answer right away. He didn't know how he did it. It was instinct. Fight, or be eaten. And he wasn't about to be anyone's prey. But humans had always been like that, scrappy survivors, taking whatever the universe threw at them and finding a way to survive, no matter the odds. "I've been through worse," he finally muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. She didn't respond, just continued her work. The quiet hum of medical equipment filled the room, broken only by the occasional beep as his vitals stabilized. Zane forced his mind to focus on something other than the pain. The image of Carr's face, stoic and distant, flickered in his mind. The lieutenant's disappointment had been palpable when the simulation had been halted. He'd called it a failure, but Zane didn't care. He'd learned something that day, something important. Humans were made for this. For survival. The Academy didn't know it yet, but Zane was about to prove it. When the medic finally finished her work, she stood back and folded her arms across her chest. "You're lucky. I've never seen a species quite like yours." "Don't sound so surprised," Zane said, trying to sit up straight. "It's a human thing. We tend to survive." She didn't answer immediately, just looked down at him with an expression that was difficult to read. For a moment, Zane wondered if she'd ever seen a human like him before. The Federation wasn't full of heroes or legends yet, but it would be soon enough. The human spirit had a way of making people take notice, whether they wanted to or not. The door to the med bay opened, and Zane was surprised to see Carr stride in, his tall, muscular frame towering over the rest of the room. The Zorvian lieutenant's eyes burned with an intensity that could melt steel, and his frown deepened as he saw Zane sitting up, his wounds already beginning to heal. "Cadet Carter," Carr's voice was as cold as the storm that had raged in the simulation chamber. "I didn't expect you to still be alive." Zane didn't flinch. "I didn't expect you to be so disappointed." Carr's lip curled in a snarl, his sharp teeth flashing. "I expected you to quit. I thought your body would break under the pressure. But you've proven me wrong. Did you think I wouldn't make it?" Zane's tone was steady, almost casual, but the challenge was clear in his eyes. Carr's gaze flickered for a moment, as if unsure whether to confront Zane or accept the truth. Finally, he took a step closer, his massive presence filling the room. "You are resilient, I'll give you that. But resilience alone is not enough. This is not your world. The galaxy will not care about your stubbornness." Zane stared back at him. "I'm not here to win anyone's favor, Carr. I'm here to show that humans can do more than just survive. We thrive." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, there was a strange stillness between them. Zane could see the flicker of doubt in Carr's eyes. He hadn't expected this from a human. The lieutenant's next words came slowly, almost reluctantly. "You will face worse in the coming tests, Carter. You will be tested in ways you cannot comprehend. And I will be watching, every step of the way." Zane grinned despite the lingering pain. "Bring it on." Carr didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned on his heel and began to leave, his heavy steps echoing in the med bay. But just before he reached the door, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "You are different from the others," he said, his voice colder now. "Perhaps you will surprise me. But you will have to do more than bleed to prove your worth." Zane nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I'll show you." As Carr left, Zane let out a breath, feeling a mix of exhaustion and adrenaline still pumping through him. The simulation had been only the beginning, but it had proven something important: he could take it. He could take everything they threw at him, and still stand tall. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its technology, its intellect, or its strength, it was its sheer, unyielding will to survive. The rest of the Academy would learn that soon enough. The hum of the simulation room was deafening. It was a stark contrast to the silence that gripped Zane as he stood at the center, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. His body still ached from the injuries he'd sustained in the previous tests, but there was no time to recover. The final challenge was upon him, and he wasn't about to back down now. Above him, the digital sky flickered to life, turning a deep red as a storm began to form. Zane's hands gripped the hilt of his combat knife, his fingers slick with sweat. It was now or never. "Cadet Carter," Carr's voice echoed over the comms, cutting through the tension in the room. "You have one last test to complete. Survive it, and I'll admit you're more than just a curiosity. Fail, and I'll have my answer about your species." Zane's lips curled into a tight smile, the challenge hanging in the air like a dare. The Zorvian lieutenant had been cold and dismissive of him ever since the first training session. But Zane wasn't here to make friends. He was here to show them just how wrong they were about humanity. "Bring it on, Carr," Zane muttered under his breath, the words barely escaping his cracked lips. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled. A massive roar echoed through the air, sending chills down his spine. The storm raged overhead, crackling with electricity. Then, the ground split open, and a creature the likes of which Zane had never seen emerged from the depths. It was massive, its jagged scales reflecting the blood-red sky. Its eyes glowed an eerie yellow, locking onto Zane with a predatory gaze. The beast was at least twice his size, and its teeth were as long as Zane's forearm. A low growl rumbled from deep within its chest, and Zane instinctively took a step back, his heart racing. There was no retreat now. The creature lunged. Zane's reflexes kicked in. He sidestepped the attack, narrowly avoiding the creature's razor-sharp claws. It crashed into the ground, sending debris flying in every direction. His breath came faster, but his mind remained clear. Every muscle screamed in protest, but Zane's focus never wavered. This was it. This was the moment he'd been preparing for. The creature rose again, its massive form towering over him. Zane could see the glint of its claws as it charged once more, a blur of motion. But Zane was ready. He ducked under the beast's strike, rolling to the side and coming up behind it. With all the strength he could muster, he swung his combat knife at the creature's exposed flank, catching it with a deep cut. The creature howled in pain, spinning around to face him. Its claws swiped at Zane, narrowly missing him. He gritted his teeth and pressed forward, using every bit of agility and speed he had. He didn't have the strength to match the creature blow for blow, but he didn't need to. He just needed to outlast it. The creature backed up a few steps, blood dripping from its wound, but it wasn't done. It roared again, charging with renewed fury. Zane's heart pounded in his chest, but his hands remained steady as he prepared for the next strike. The ground trembled as the beast closed in, and Zane leaped forward, narrowly avoiding its teeth as he drove his knife into its side once more. This time, the beast faltered. It was weakening. Carr's voice crackled in Zane's ear. "You're not going to win this, Carter. You cannot defeat it with mere brute force. You lack the stamina. The strength." Zane's breath was ragged, but he ignored Carr's words. He didn't need strength. He had something far more powerful, determination. His body was on the verge of collapse, but his mind was sharp. He could outlast this creature. He could endure. The beast lunged again, but this time, Zane was ready. He dodged, grabbing a rock from the ground and hurling it at the creature's face. It distracted it long enough for Zane to get behind it again, his knife plunging into the soft spot beneath its scales. The creature let out a final, guttural growl before collapsing, its massive body crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. Zane stood over it, panting heavily, blood dripping from his wounds. His body trembled from exhaustion, but he didn't let himself falter. The storm above him began to clear, the blood-red sky fading to a dull, gray hue. The simulation room went silent, the echoes of the battle slowly fading into nothing. "Impressive," Carr's voice was low, grudgingly respectful. "I didn't expect you to last this long. But this is only one victory. You will face many more challenges ahead. Don't let your arrogance fool you into thinking this was the end." Zane wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes fixed on the fallen creature. "I'm not done yet, Carr. This is just the beginning." For a moment, there was a silence on the comms. Then, Carr spoke again, his tone less condescending, more measured. "You have earned my respect, Cadet Carter. And perhaps more importantly, you've earned the respect of the Academy. But this is only one challenge. Many more will come." Zane's chest tightened with a mix of relief and anticipation. He'd made it through the hardest trial yet, but Carr was right. This was just one step. There would be more trials, more dangers to face, but Zane wasn't worried. He'd proven something today, not just to Carr, but to everyone watching. Humans weren't just survivors. They were relentless. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," Zane said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. The storm faded, the last remnants of the battle evaporating into the air. Zane stood alone in the chamber, the victory a hard-earned one, but it was his. It was a small triumph in a long journey, but it was enough to remind him that no matter what came next, he would keep fighting. Because that was what humans did. They fought, they endured, and when the odds were stacked against them, they found a way to win.